A black 14-year-old boy named Marcus Webb was cut from the varsity basketball team in front of his teammates by coach Gerald Briggs, who called him slow, told him he would never be good enough, and said boys like him did not belong on a team like this. What Coach Briggs did not know was that the man sitting in the back row of the bleachers watching the entire tryout was NBA scout David Webb, Marcus's father. It started as an ordinary Friday afternoon at Jefferson High. School. The gymnasium smelled of rubber and sweat and polished hardwood, the familiar scent of a space that had seen 100 tryouts before this one. Afternoon light filtered through the high windows near the ceiling, casting long pale stripes across the court. 30 boys had shown up for varsity basketball tryouts. Most of them had been preparing for weeks. Some had practiced in driveways until their mothers called them in for dinner. Others had watched film on their phones late at night, studying footwork and angles and timing. Marcus Webb had done all of these things. He had also done something else. He had gotten up every morning for 4 months at 5:30 and run 3 miles before school, not because anyone told him to, because he wanted this more than anything he had wanted in his life. Marcus was 14 years old, lean and long-limbed, with the quiet intensity of a boy who does not talk much but notices everything. He had dark brown skin and close-cropped hair, and the kind of posture that comes not from confidence alone, but from years of being watched and deciding to be worth watching. His father had taught him that. His father, David Webb, had spent his career watching young athletes in gymnasiums and on courts and on fields across the country. He knew what potential looked like before it became visible to anyone else. He had told Marcus since he was 8 years old, "The body you have right now is not the body you will have. What I am watching is how you move inside what you have. That is what tells me everything." Coach Gerald Briggs had been the varsity basketball coach at Jefferson High for 12 years. He was a large man with a grey crew cut and the bearing of someone who had once been an athlete and had never quite let go of the authority that came with it. He ran tryouts the same way every year. 2 hours of drills, scrimmage, and evaluation. He carried a clipboard. He made notes. He called boys by their last names, and his voice carried across the gymnasium with the weight of someone accustomed to not being questioned. He had built a successful program at Jefferson. He had also, over 12 years, built a reputation among certain parents and certain students that was harder to articulate but equally consistent. The boys who made his team looked a certain way, moved a certain way, came from a certain part of the district. Marcus arrived 20 minutes early. He stretched alone near the baseline, methodical and unhurried. Other boys arrived in clusters, talking loudly, throwing the ball around. Marcus watched them without appearing to watch them, the way his father had taught him to observe without telegraphing observation. He noted the players who were already performing for the coach before the tryout had begun, the ones whose movements became slightly larger and more deliberate the moment Coach Briggs walked through the door. He noted the players who moved the same whether the coach was watching or not. He was one of the second kind. The drills began at 3:30, defensive slides, ball handling sequences, 3-man weave, fast break progressions. Marcus moved through each drill with the economy of someone who had done these movements thousands of times, not the explosive showmanship that some boys brought, but a clean, efficient execution that spoke of deep practice. He did not make mistakes. He did not make a single turnover in the ball handling sequence that cost 2 other boys their composure. When the fast break drill reached him, his pass to the cutting wing was timed with a precision that made the receiver's job effortless. The boy who caught the pass barely had to adjust his stride. That was the point. Marcus knew it was the point. His father had told him 1,000 times, the best pass is the one the receiver doesn't have to think about. Coach Briggs watched from half court, clipboard in hand, making marks. He watched everyone. When his eyes landed on Marcus, they lingered for a moment with an expression that was not exactly recognition and not exactly dismissal, but something in between. Something that had already formed an opinion and was looking for evidence to confirm it rather than evidence to challenge it. In the bleachers, 20 rows up and to the left, a man sat alone with a paper cup of coffee and his arms resting on the row in front of him. He wore a dark jacket and no identifying credentials. He had arrived before any of the boys, slipping in through the side entrance while the gymnasium was still empty. He watched the drills with the quiet, focused attention of someone whose professional life had trained him to see what casual observers miss. His name was David Webb. He had not announced himself to Coach Briggs. He had not announced himself to anyone. He had come to watch his son try out for a high school basketball team, the same way he watched dozens of young athletes every year, because watching was what he did, and because this particular player was the most important player he had ever evaluated. The scrimmage began at 4:15. Skins versus shirts. Marcus was on the skins team. In the first 3 minutes, he did nothing that would appear on a highlight reel. He set a screen that freed a teammate for an open three. He deflected a pass in the lane that led to a fast break the other direction. He called out a defensive rotation that prevented a bucket. None of these things showed up on Coach Briggs's clipboard in the categories coaches usually fill in first. No points, no rebounds, no spectacular moments. Just the invisible architecture of a team functioning better because one player understood what the game required before the game required it. At 4:32, with 7 minutes left in the scrimmage, something happened that changed the temperature of the gymnasium. Marcus stole a lazy crossover dribble near the half-court line, pushed the ball ahead with one hand, took 2 strides, and finished at the rim with his left hand over a defender 3 inches taller. Clean. No foul. The gym made the sound gyms make when something undeniable happens, not a roar. A collective intake of breath followed by noise. Some of the boys on the sideline stood up. A girl sitting in the first row of the bleachers said something to the girl next to her. Even 2 players on the opposing team exchanged a look that said what they had just seen. Coach Briggs did not react. He watched. He made a mark on his clipboard that could have meant anything. At 5 o'clock, tryouts ended. Coach Briggs called the 30 boys to center court. They gathered around him, breathing hard, some with hands on knees, others standing straight and trying not to let their exhaustion show. The coach looked at his clipboard. He began calling names. One by one, boys separated into 2 groups. The ones whose names were called walked to the right side of the coach. The ones not called walked to the left. Marcus stood in the center and waited. His name was not called in the first group, or the second, or the third. As the group to the right grew larger and the group to the left shrank, Marcus stayed in the center, still, hands at his sides, face neutral. His breathing, though the scrimmage had demanded everything from his lungs, had returned to something almost normal. When Coach Briggs finished reading names, 14 boys stood to his right. 14 boys stood to his left. Marcus stood alone in the center. Briggs looked at him. He said, "Webb, left side." Marcus walked to the left. He stood among the boys who had not made the team. Briggs addressed the group to the left with the efficiency of a man who had done this before and did not find it difficult. He said, "You were not selected for the varsity roster this year. Some of you may want to try again next year." He looked at the clipboard, and then he looked up, and his gaze moved across the group and stopped on Marcus. He said, "Webb?" He said it the way you say a word when you have been waiting to say it. He said, "I watched you out there today, and I want to tell you something directly because I think it will save you some time." He said, "You are slow." He said it without heat, which made it worse than if he had said it with anger. He said, "You are slow and you are soft, and this program is built for a certain kind of player." He paused. Then he said, "Boys like you, son, they don't make it at this level." He said boys like you in a way that had no ambiguity about what he meant. Every boy on both sides of that gymnasium understood what he meant. The 14 boys to the right looked at the floor, or at the wall, or at each other. The 14 boys to the left were very still. Marcus looked at Coach Briggs and said nothing. He had been taught that too. The gymnasium was completely silent for 3 seconds. Then, from somewhere in the upper bleachers, the sound of footsteps on aluminum. Slow, deliberate footsteps descending from the 20th row to the gym floor. Every head turned. A man in a dark jacket walked across the court toward the group at center. He had a paper cup of coffee in one hand. He walked with the unhurried certainty of someone who knows exactly what he is about to do and has decided there is no reason to hurry doing it. He stopped 5 feet from Coach Briggs. He looked at Marcus first. 1 second. A specific look that said, "I saw everything, and I will tell you later what I saw." Then he looked at Briggs. He said, "Coach Briggs, my name is David Webb." He reached into his jacket and produced a business card and held it out. Briggs took it. He read it. The expression that moved across his face in the next 4 seconds was something that everyone in that gymnasium would remember for a long time. The card read, "David Webb, Player Personnel Scout, Eastern Conference, National Basketball Association." Briggs looked at the card. He looked at Marcus. He looked at the card again. David Webb said, "I have been evaluating basketball players professionally for 14 years. I just watched your tryout from the 20th row." He paused. Then he said, "The player you just called slow is the most fundamentally sound 14-year-old I have evaluated in 3 years. His court vision is at a level I see in college sophomores. His pass timing on the fast break in the second drill was textbook, and the finish he put up at 4:32 in the left corner of the lane on a left-handed layover, a 3-inch height disadvantage, is not something you teach. That is something you have or you do not have." He stopped. He let that sit in the gymnasium for a moment. Then he said, "With respect, Coach, I want you to consider that the category you placed my son in when you looked at him today may have had nothing to do with basketball. The gymnasium was so quiet that the ventilation system in the ceiling was audible." Briggs held the business card in both hands. The 14 boys to the right were very still. The 14 boys to the left were looking at Marcus, who was looking at his father with an expression that was not triumph and was not relief, but was something quieter and deeper than either of those things. It was the expression of a boy who had been prepared for a moment and had lived it exactly the way he was prepared to live it, and was now watching the next part begin. Briggs opened his mouth. He said, "I did not." He stopped. He tried again. He said, "The evaluation was based on." He stopped again. David Webb looked at him steadily and said nothing. He did not need to say anything. Every player in that gymnasium had heard what had been said 4 minutes ago. The words "boys like you do not make it at this level" were still in the air. Marcus's teammates on the left side of the court, the boys who had not made the team, were the first to react. A boy named Jordan, who had been Marcus's closest friend since 6th grade, started clapping. 1 set of hands, then 2, then 4. Then the sound spread through the gymnasium, and even 3 or 4 of the boys on the right side, the ones who had made the team, joined it. Not all of them, but enough. The applause lasted for 12 seconds. It was not a celebration of an ending. It was the sound of 30 boys acknowledging something that had just been said out loud, that needed to be said out loud, something they had all felt in various forms and various moments in various rooms, and had not always had the words or the authority to name. Coach Briggs asked Marcus and David Webb to stay after the other boys had filed out of the ACET gymnasium. The 3 of them stood near the scorer's table. The conversation lasted 22 minutes. I will tell you only what mattered. At the end of it, Marcus Webb was added to the varsity roster, not because his father held a title that made it politically impossible not to, because David Webb had spent 22 minutes walking Coach Briggs through every moment of his son's tryout with the specificity of a professional evaluation, and at the end of that 22 minutes, something had shifted. Not completely, not permanently, but enough. Briggs said, "I may have missed some things." David Webb said, "You did." Then he said, "I would like you to look again." And Briggs, to his credit, or perhaps to his discomfort, said, "Yes." Marcus Webb finished that season with the 3rd highest assist total in the district. He did not lead the team in points. He led the team in assists, and in what coaches who have learned to see it call floor presence, the quality of making everyone around you better without requiring the credit for it. At the end of the season, Coach Briggs said at the awards dinner that Marcus Webb was the kind of player who taught his coach as much as the coach taught him. It was the kind of sentence that contained, if you listened carefully, the acknowledgement of everything that had happened in that gymnasium in October. Not an apology, but something. Sometimes something is where it starts. David Webb drove Marcus home after the awards dinner. They did not talk about October for most of the drive. Then Marcus said, "Dad, how long did you know?" David said, "Know what?" Marcus said that it was going to work out. His father drove for a moment in silence. Then he said, "I did not know it was going to work out. I knew that what he said about you was wrong, and I knew that wrong things said in public deserve to be corrected in public." He paused. Then he said, "The outcome was not guaranteed. What was guaranteed was that I was not going to sit in row 20 and say nothing." Marcus nodded. His father said, "Marcus, there will be rooms in your life where someone looks at you and decides before you open your mouth." He said, "Your job is not to change what they see when they look. Your job is to be so completely and specifically yourself that what they see when they look eventually has to adjust to the reality in front of them. He said, "It does not always work, but it is always worth doing." Marcus said, "I know." His father said, "I know you know. I just need to say it out loud sometimes." They drove the rest of the way home in silence, which was its own kind of conversation. My name is Silent Truth. Every voice that was silenced deserves to be heard. And every scout who sits in the 20th row knows that what you see in the first minute is only the beginning of the story.